Welcome everybody to our tasting training videos that we created for you so you can learn how to have the best tastings possible. We have a great panel of experts today. We have VP of Sales Marlene Kane, Senior Executive Director Diane Nozick, and Senior Executive Directors Team Nichols, Jeff and Tammy. Welcome everybody. I think what we'd like to focus on right now is all about host coaching and how to really do the best host coaching you can. Host coaching is so essential to your tasting. Wouldn't you agree, Marlene?
Oh yes, it's absolutely crucial for your success in this business, especially with your sales and your bookings. Absolutely.
So Diane, do you have any tips on how you host coach? What are the best things you do to get the most out of your host for the most successful tastings?
I think I probably do have a few tips, Joe. Thank you. Constant communication and just being in touch with your hosts. I think the biggest mistake that I see with new consultants, especially because they're nervous, so they book a tasting and then they're nervous to be in touch with that host. They feel like they're being pushy or they don't know what to say. And then next thing you know, 3 weeks has gone by and their tasting's 2 days away and they haven't even talked to the host. So being in communication. I love the host coaching checklist that we have in our back office in our resource center. So I print one of those out for each one of my tastings, and then I staple the original order form that they booked off of to it. So from the tasting that they booked off, I staple it to that. And then I really just follow the steps on that tip, making sure, on that sheet, making sure that I'm in touch with them.
Ah, that's great. That's a great idea. How about you, Tammy?
It is very important, Joe. It really is going to be indicative if you have a good tasting or if you've got the right people there. You know, it's important to have wine lovers at your wine tasting. And as Diane just said, communication is very important. We also, I know all of us like to keep everything very simple for our host because we want them to repeat and we want them to talk about how fun and how easy this is. So we actually send our host a very simple email with wording for the invitation, as well as a short grocery list for the cheeses and chocolates. Jeff and I learned early on that, you know, if we don't give them a very simple list of cheeses, they'll go to the cheese counter and the guy behind the cheese counter will talk them into buying 10 different cheeses. And then you're there with all these pairings that you don't really know what goes with what, especially as a new consultant. So this really makes your life easier as a consultant, and it makes their life easier as a host. Mm-hmm. So it's very important just to give them these little tips in the email, very simply stated. You're confirming your date and time that you'll be there 30 minutes early, the wording for the invitation, the grocery list, and you know the importance of having wine lovers there. Mm-hmm. So it keeps it very simple.
Is there a magic amount of times that you communicate with your host via the phone, you know, or email to ensure that everything's moving along for the tasting and the right amount of guests are showing up and they're comfortable with what's going on?
I think that we have kind of learned, you know, we say that there's 9 opportunities to touch your host. Mm-hmm. Okay, the first, typically, not always, but typically, you book most of your tastings at tastings. Mm-hmm. So that's your first touch. Your host, your next host has just seen you and had a fun time with you at your tasting. So that's your first touch. Your second touch is really the next day. You are just really calling to confirm the date and making sure that everything is set up. Your third touch is the email. Okay, it's the email specifically, you know, indicating what we just talked about, confirming the time and the date, the wording for the invitation, and the grocery list. Okay, your fourth touch is about a week out, contacting them and checking to see where their numbers are. If they've got too many, tell them no fear. We'll always have a no-show or 2. We really teach our hosts to have 8 to 12 guests there, no more. It's not bigger is better, you know. So, and then if they don't have quite enough, we tell them no fear with that either. Continue to invite or have some of their dearer friends to invite a guest to come along with them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the fifth touch is like we call them about 2 days prior to the event. We ask them, number 1, you know, what are your numbers looking like? Number 2, did you have any problems finding the cheeses on the list? Because I don't want to walk into any surprises, you know, that they don't have what's on the list. You know, so I'm just kind of confirming that. And then of course the 6th touch is there at the tasting. The 7th touch is the next day. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can either call them and say, thank you so much for inviting us into your home. we send every host a handwritten thank you. That's kind of one of those, you know, to me, it's a necessity, and it's something that's kind of faded away with our society. Unfortunately, we've all gotten so busy, but a handwritten note goes a long way. So that's the 7th touch. The 8th touch is really about when you think they're getting the wine. So you want to kind of think about 10 days after that to see if they've gotten their wine. And then a couple of weeks after that, just to follow up and see if, you know, if they are enjoying everything. And also it's a great opportunity to say, you know what, I know you've got another group of friends and we'd love to do another tasting with you. Don't forget our wines change frequently. Again, just as a reminder, we release 4 new wines every month. So let's do this again. You are a great host. So lots of opportunities to touch your host, whether it's a phone call, an email, in person, a handwritten note. Lots of ways to touch your host.
I want to commend you on memorizing all of those 9 touches. I mean, that's a lot of touches.
That was amazing.
I mean, but if you think about it, just because she's coaching every host, it's really not, it just comes naturally because she's coaching every host the same way. If I could just add one other place where I'm touching my host, it's about a week before the 1 week call, and I know you do this too, but we can't memorize all 9, is I'm just checking in to, once I know their sampler shipped, to give them their tracking number. If it's shipping directly to her, to email her and just check in and say your sampler's on the way,
Yes.
here's a tracking. Or if it's shipping to me, about 10 days before, depending on your state, it may ship to you, the consultant. I want to check and make sure it's on its way, just to make sure there's no surprises, like I forgot to enter the credit card, it didn't clear, there haven't been any changes. And I want to make her receiving the wine, or him, as easy as possible. So I do want to be in communication about that.
Yes.
Part of the key to the whole process of host coaching is you want to make, especially for a new consultant, is to make sure that when you go into that tasting environment, that you don't have a situation that we lovingly call them secret tastings, where they think it's a party, when they don't understand that this is an opportunity to taste and shop for wines, or they think it's a time just to show up at any time. We do a formal guided wine tasting, and so as part of what the ladies do is really to let them know that they need to let their guests know that this is an opportunity. And so the wording, they both mentioned the wording that they give, we want to make sure that that wording gets to their guests as well, so that those guests don't get there and suddenly realize that they're in an environment where they can shop, because you know, their eyes get big and you're not going to have as good a tasting. You also don't want to have a situation where people show up every 15 minutes for 2 or 3 hours. You want them to be ready there. And I think that one of the things that the ladies do very, very well is to let them know that the wines will begin pouring at a certain time. Normally if the tasting begins at 7 o'clock, the wines will begin pouring at 7:15. Everybody's sitting down ready to go. If you do that, especially as a new person, you're always afraid and you don't want to be overbearing, but those are keys to making sure that the whole process, really key to making sure that you have a good solid tasting.
Right. I mean, this is your income, so it's your job to make sure that your host has a good experience. And your host wants to have a successful tasting, he or she wants to do a good job, but they've most likely never done this before. And even people who are in other direct sales companies aren't, you know, they still need the same help and the same guidance to make sure they have a successful tasting.
Right, and I know that there are certain situations you can get yourself into as a consultant where you want to have a tasting and someone's interested in having a tasting, and it's a birthday party or some kind of an event like that. And Marlene, I know we've talked about that, and typically not a great idea, right?
No, it's just not. And they're usually a disaster. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
For the most part, it's just not the right situation. In other words, your tasting needs to be a tasting. It has to be business.
Focused.
And you're focused.
Yeah.
If a sampler is going out the door, then it needs to be a focused. If you want me to come do your bridal shower, your birthday party, or your engagement party, or anything like that, then you need to pre-purchase wine, a couple of cases, whatever your minimum is, and then I can come and pour for you at that event. But that's not a buying event.
Right, and that way you're covered, you know, because you've sold the wine up front. That's how you that's right.
And then I can meet people and I can network my business, but I'm covered. But if it's not strictly focused on our wine consultants, then it's not a wine buying event.
Right.
And I think it's important for us, and sometimes this just takes a little bit of time and experience, but the more questions we ask up front, the more we're going to find that out.
Yeah.
Very
And
good
as soon
point.
as we find out that it's a birthday party, let's explain to them what we're doing. And if you want us there, we'd love to be there, but this is not really going to be a wine buying event. Because your guests are going to be focused on celebrating whose ever birthday it is. So if you want to purchase, 2 or 3 cases of wine. You need to decide what that is for you. I know when we first started, we would go for 2 cases, you know. Now I don't know that we would, but you know, seriously, you know, when we first started, you'll do that for 2 cases of wine. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's important, and I think you have to feel totally comfortable about making that kind of a request, because it is your business.
Yes.
And you don't want to go out there for a $0 tasting,
No.
or just be the bartender for a night. You want to make sure that there's preconditions that are met for you to even walk out your door to go to that person's home.
Well,
yes.
especially when a sampler's involved.
Absolutely.
And you know what? If somebody calls you with a hard and fast date, an easy question to ask is, are you doing this in conjunction with something else? If they have a date in mind, they're like, can you be there on July 16th? There's your sign, okay?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's flexibility, and they are really more looking at a wine tasting. But, you know, if they have a hard and fast date, ask them what else they're trying to tie in with this. Just, and then explain to them what it is you do, you know, that you will be offering wines that their guests will be able to purchase and will have shipped directly to their door. And, you know, then they understand, oh, wait a minute, I don't really want you to sell wine here. So you can fit each other's needs.
Excellent. Anybody else have anything to add about host coaching? Well, there you have it. Some great ideas on how to coach your host. And so I hope you guys take that into consideration when you're talking to people that want to have a tasting, and make it the most successful tasting you can have. Thank you very much.